Good evening, everybody, and welcome to V2, Lab for the Unstable Media, or actually V2 TV, I'd say. Welcome to the first Who Cares session, a series of 4 conversations that I'll be having with the artists from the exhibition and authors from the book in the coming 4 days. But before diving into the conversation that will be happening tonight, I'd like to give you a little bit more context of how this program is compiled. It all started for me with this publication, the To Mind is to Care publication that V2 Publishing launched somewhat 1.5 years ago, edited by Joke Brouwer and Sjoerd van Tuinen. It's an interdisciplinary study of care, and I approached it as the first chapter of a research series that I found quite interesting, and the second chapter I started with an exhibition. It's the exhibition in which we are currently sitting. Sadly, not many of you were able to visit it in real life because right after the openings weekend and a lovely opening, we had to close because of the COVID measurements. But to give you somewhat of an insight in what the exhibition was about, the exhibition focused on the contribution of Ellen Dissanayake in the book Caring About Capsules. She argues that the things that we do not take care of lose our attention and therefore eventually are forgotten. According to her, art fulfills a necessary role in directing our attention towards things that are important or should be considered important. Artists do this by taking care of, through their motivation, planning, decisions, strength, persistence, skills, and patience, all qualities that you can find in the artworks that are presented. The results of these actions offers insights into what caring for means in the practice of an artist and how they used to investigate caring themselves. They provide insight into the preconditions of taking care of something or someone, but they also reflect, for example, on the care we take for our technology and the technology that can can be provided by technology to humans. From this quote or notion, I took the act of caring for humans, other life forms, and technology as the starting point of the current exhibition. And since not many of you were able to see the exhibition, I have a digital tour in the form of a video to give you a small idea of what it's all about. So that, I hope that gives you somewhat of an insight in what the exhibition is about. Besides the work of Nathalie Gebert, you've seen work by Dries en Verstappen, Ana Maria Gomez Lopez, and We Make Carpets. All of them will be joining us in the coming week to talk a bit more about their work. Very practical. Today we'll talk with Nathalie Gebert and Jeannette Pols about the aesthetic value of care. I'm approaching it in an open conversation in which Nathalie already mentioned that she's kicking off with somewhat more in-depth information about the work, where I'll still be the host, and we'll see how the conversation rolls out. At the end of the conversation, I'll also open up the floor for everyone. You can also already mention via the chat that you have a question, and I can. We have to manually unmute you so you can be part of the conversation. And I'd like to dive right into introducing both Nathalie and Jeannette. Nathalie Gebert is an artist in this exhibition. She's an artist and designer working in the field of new media, art, and feminist theory. Her work revolves around the research on the relationship between technologies, non-human lives, and techno-feminism, using experimental methods to reinvent ways of communication. She explores the individual properties, history, and potential of materials. She's also co-editor of Haaref Scene and is currently doing research on technoid natures, landscapes, and symbiosis. Jeannette Pols is the Socrates professor in anthropology in the anthropology department at the University of Amsterdam. Pols works with the medical ethics section of Amsterdam University Medical Centers and is a member of the Dutch Ministry of Health Council for Health and Society. Her research and teachings take place in the crossroads of the humanities and the social science, signified by the term empirical ethics, using an empirical ethics approach. She studies how the good emerges in different forms in the care practice, and in particular in the relation to the introduction of new technologies. She's an author of Care at Distance, on the closeness of technology, and a co-editor of Care in Practice, on tinkering in clinics, homes, and farms, and as mentioned, also a contributor to the publication. So I want to give the floor to Nathalie first.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm Nathalie. I got already introduced. So I might just start with introducing my work a little bit. So you already have seen a bit about it in the video. But I'd like to show maybe some clear pictures of the work too. So it's clear what's happening. So this is kind of the setup. In the middle of the work is the plant Mimosa pudica, which is usually also known as shy plant or sensitive plant. And the famous property of it is that it moves when it gets triggered. And so I used this mechanism as a way I wanted to try to make a signal transmission. So this was the first idea behind this project. And what I did to read the movement of the leaf is just a sensor, a self-built sensor that reads how near the leaves are to the sensor. It's just an infrared sensor, but I figured it was the best for this project because it's non-invasive. And when the plant got triggered, maybe by a wind blow or something, when the sensor takes it, then the pump starts, and yeah, here you can also see the sensor again. And when the pump starts, it takes the water out of the test tube and shoots it right next to the unit behind it. And so the signal can technically go through. And I will also maybe show a quick teaser video of it in action. And yes, so when I was working on this project, I had to, I let it. Yes, so when I started to work on this project and while also exhibiting, I figured that I have to take a lot of care of these plants because they are actually very sensitive, not only for triggers and that trigger their motorical abilities, but also just in terms of survival. If they get too cold or get not enough or too much water, they don't move anymore, and in the worst case maybe even die, but usually they just stop moving and then they get taken care of. And so using this machine is a continuous exercise, kind of, to cooperate with the plant and watch it and understand what it needs. And so it evolved into a concept that is really focused on taking care. Yeah, maybe that's like the basic idea behind it.
Yeah, it's an interesting starting point. I found it interesting. Prior to the exhibition, you also had a curator with Dora, a curatorial intern at V2, a conversation about your notion of care and how you approached it. And in this, you specifically, in the transcript I read, you specifically mentioned a plant all the time. And also the stress that the plant could be in, but you don't address the entire ecosystem of the work. So I'm curious how you see this, the technique, the code, the hardware that's also involved in the notion of care.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about, I think, the metals and how I also found it interesting to see the metals as something living too in this whole setup. But I think if I start like from a aesthetical point, which is kind of the main topic, I think I kind of used associations that are kind of, I think I said something like brutal,
Sure.
that
Yeah.
are very massive next to the plant especially. And I mean, the plant is super fragile, and I think it's an interesting contrast that I also see reflected in the reactions of people who see the work. I was there for the opening and talked to a few people also, and I always see like there are always a few people who have some of a concern for the plant, if it's safe in this environment, if it feels well, and I can understand where this is coming from, because this setup looks like an experimenting space. Like
Sure. Yeah.
maybe not an empathic space, but more like a very industrial and cold space maybe. So but since I'm more using the technology, I would say, as a prosthetic, I would say, like I still think the machine and what it's doing is very much linked also to my responsibility. So yeah, what I want to say is that the machine looks kind of cold, but in the end it's not doing anything really harmful. Like, it's just spraying water, which is actually a thing that also happens to a mimosa in nature when it's raining. But yeah, I think due to the association with the looks, people start to get concerned and really start to have a lot of empathy.
Yeah, it's interesting that you do dive into the aesthetic value, which could be an interesting bridge, because that's the aesthetic value of care is mentioned in the essay of Jeannette. But before making that bridge, I'd say, well, because I'm pointing at the work because I'm of course obviously sitting right next to it. And what I find interesting in this aesthetic, because it does have one side of being a lab type of setting, of course, where you right away think that there's an experiment being conducted. You also have this layer of the audience being able to interact with it. Obviously, the touching is also a really important role in interacting with it, but and also the triggering of the water, which also feels in the film. You've seen it can be like a water pistol gun, but it's also technology taking care of these non-life forms, in my how I'd say. Yeah, so there are many layers in it, I'd say. Yeah, let's.
Can I ask some things about the artwork?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I was wondering, so if I think about care, there's always something like responsiveness to needs or something, but these plants are triggered by whatever, and then they feed the other plant, who may be thirsty for water, may not be thirsty for water. So in a sense, it's if I'm trying to look at this artwork as a caring artwork, I see some difficulties also, and also for the poor first plant in the row. There's no plant with a water gun behind it, so it will never get any water. Or how do you figure that?
Yeah, usually it's there's also a part of maintenance to switch them out. Sometimes, like maybe after each day, or maybe even after half a day, so they all would get water. And yeah, I'm actually also clear in that the care is needed because of circumstances I am building. Like, it's not that the plants actually need me for living, but that I need the plants for like the performance of the artwork. And I would say, like, to simply put it, I try to pay back the plants in taking the best care of them as I can. And it's also very necessary for it to work.
Yeah, that's also very interesting then, because then that makes you part of the artwork. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, now I had to give a bit of responsibility away since I can't be there the whole time. But usually, yeah, I have to watch it and also maybe see that visitors don't go too hard on the plants and try to touch it, because actually it's not supposed to be like everyone should go and just touch them. It's more like watching it, and yes, maybe the best way to show it would actually be someone knowing how to use it, triggering the first plant with just maybe an air blow, because that's usually enough, and then just watch it, and maybe don't give in into the urge of needing to touch the plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that indeed makes you part of the artwork, which I do think is a very nice perspective on caring. Additionally to the object that you see, that you have to look after the plant, you have to make sure that they don't drown, that they don't die, that people don't kill the plants or do wrong things with it. So it's a very relational setup in the end.
Yeah,
It includes you as the artist, as the carer.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you also introduced this notion of you as caretaker, indeed, as an artist, because I saw, of course, the layers of the general audience walking in, being able to manipulate the plant, the technology that's a part of it. But now also, of course, either the artist or it's the person that is responsible for the caretaking if the artist is not present. And what I find quite interesting already, Jeannette Pols in the essay introduced this term of medical ethics, and right away as part of as looking at care, and right away you in every conversation you add layers that are further or more than just these medical ethic situation. Like she introduces the patient autonomy, doing good, not doing harm, and justice. But she argues that comfort, gratitude, and in this case stress might be things to concern as well. And you right away introduce all of these additional notions in your caretaking as well. That's interesting.
What I also think makes that link with the medical ethics is that there's a difference between medical ethics as working with these grand universal concepts that should fit everywhere for everyone and for every plant probably. But what you see here in the artwork and what you see in actual care practices is a very local way of looking at what's going on and what needs to be done. So it's very much about specificities rather than generalities. And this is what you see happening in the artwork as well. So it's really a shift from, I would, in my approach at least, from medical ethics towards empirical ethics, so that you really look at what is out there and what happens there and what kind of values emerge there.
Yes, this was also totally the work experience with this, that I really had to watch and understand. And I felt that this is really a big part of taking care, like to get to know the ones you are interacting with.
Yeah. And what's also nice is this idea that you cannot be there all the time to look after your plant kids, so to speak. But that is also part of care, right? That you cannot do everything by yourself, that you have to rely on others to do the work with you, because otherwise the plants will not survive anyway. So it's that's also a collective endeavor.
Yes.
Let's see. In your Jeannette, in your essay, you also introduced this notion of good life. Could you elaborate, or could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really the same kind of shift. In academic ethics, if you want, there's a lot of attention for kind of prescriptive normativity, so that ethicists try to find out what we really should do or what is really good. But if you look at these other different traditions, going back to the ancient Greek on the good life, that is much more about practices of the good life. So different ways of, and also different philosophical schools practicing the good life differently. And this shift towards practice completely changes the idea of what ethics should do, because then again, you can take this more empirical perspective and closely regard what is going on in practices and what is good there for whom, what is good for this plant, what is good for this patient. It's again about specific situations.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting because it shows really much that you kind of have if you want to have a universal standard for caretaking, then you need one ideal standard for building everything around it, and that gets problematic very fast because you can't give everyone and everything the care it needs. So I mean, this artwork that I built, I think it only also works for the mimosa. I don't think it will really work for anything else. So this is, yeah, I think I had to really concentrate on one kind of plant, because otherwise I wouldn't really understand what's happening, and then it would only be something that I'm using and not really interacting with.
I think if you look at the good life, or if you look at all the several aspects of the work, the technology is maybe suffering more than the plants itself, because they might be watered like a beautiful rainfall if the interaction goes well, but the water can also end up on the circuit boards and destroy them.
Which never happened. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
No, so it never killed anything yet. So.
I found that quite yeah, I was really aware of also this this difficulty in the.
Yeah, I mean, it happens quite fast if you don't adjust it correctly, but usually if you take your time to set everything up, then it doesn't happen actually, which is also a bit of a surprise for me in the beginning, that all the technical parts were still doing fine, even though there might be rust on the metal, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's also a nice point, that technology is not in opposition to care, which is often thought that care should be this humane thing, whereas technology is alienating and it's not good for us. But this is a very old dichotomy that doesn't hold, and that your artwork also nicely shows that the things go together. We need technologies in order to care. And then again, we have to care for the technologies in turn, because otherwise they might get rusted or they will not send the water to the next plant and so on. So that's also nicely signified by this artwork.
Jeannette, in your research about really the introduction of new technologies in care, do you see that there's also this notion of taking care of the technology in the process, or even only because it's cost efficient, or is this really a new notion?
There's actually a nice parallel to the work of artists here. Often you have these entrepreneurs and designers of new technologies, and they say to people in care practices, what you are doing is so old-fashioned. What you should do is use this shiny new technology that I made. It will solve all your problems, make your care more cost efficient, better quality, and blah, blah, blah. And it kind of presents an autonomous artist as creating artworks on its own, designing technologies on their own, and on their own think that they have the better solution, not recognizing that there's a lot of skills in the practices already, and that there's traditions that you have to deal with and things that people find important. So this is nice in Nathalie's caring artwork by being part of the artwork, or I would suggest that you try to also to the audiences to try to show how they can interpret the artwork, how they can use the technologies and what sense it might make, and also work with the skills and understandings that people have in order to create something new, rather than doing it on your own as an autonomous art.
And thank you. And I also wanted to ask you maybe about how you, if you see like a difference in care work, like with the intention of care, maybe, like if the intention of care is maybe something like empathy, or if the intention of care is something like a value or ownership, and if you have also wrote about this in a way.
Yes, my answer would be that it's always context specific, and that one of the important things about my approach, I would say, is that you can look at ideals and values that are there without necessarily subscribing to these ideals and values. So you could see that, for instance, in care practices, people try to work at the independence and autonomy of patients, but you can also look at the kind of effects that has, so that you're not necessarily agreeing with the field that you study. I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question.
Oh, I think it is. I mean, it's hard to separate it from each other. Sometimes it's both, I think.
Both what?
Even though I don't know how much one will like subscribe to this idea, but sometimes, I don't know, people have empathy and at the same time feel a kind of ownership or capital value to something. So it's not exactly separable, but
no, but there's also care where empathy is not the thing to do, right? So remember, in psychiatry, you have all kinds of strange situations where caregivers have to respond to, and sometimes empathy isn't the most wise thing to do all the time, because they might go crazy themselves. People demand lots of attention and all the time, and all day. Then it's also can also be good care to say, okay, well, I'll talk to you at this point, but then now I have to do some other work, which can be done with a lot of empathy, of course, but it's not exactly. Here, empathy can also go wrong, you could say.
Yes, true.
In this idea, this autonomy of the patient, is that can we see that as something to just put the patient or plant or human back on its feet again as soon as possible, to then make them autonomous again? Or because I can also imagine that if you wouldn't approach it on this new innovative new technology type of approach, then that you would be able to give an obsolete version of a specific device you could give the patient home, so make him more autonomous. Or where is that notion of autonomy?
I'm not sure if I got your question, but maybe it's nice to think of one of these plants, and yeah, we want to flourish. It has to grow, it has to move, it has to send signals in order to make the whole network function. But it will never be autonomous. It will always rely on the networks that surround it and that feed it and that take care that it grows. So I do think that autonomy in care is a very influential principle, but it's in a sense a big misunderstanding, because it kind of suggests that we have these autonomous entities that can exist by themselves and govern themselves, whereas I would say we could better understand autonomy in terms of networks and realizing things with other people and other things, because you cannot really do much on your own. This is particularly so for vulnerable entities like plants or patients, of course.
You're absolutely right. I bypassed this idea of course, with putting somebody up their feet and out of the hospital right away. But of course, you're not there at that point already. You need, of course, even in your own house, you need the accessibility of the water, the food, So thanks for correcting me on this.
Yeah, and you need a house, and you need you need many more things in order to flourish. So looking at the networks that provide that is really very important. I do see a mentioning on the chat a question for Nathalie. Did you see that, Nathalie?
Sorry. Oh, it's on the Q&A. You have Cavier.
Or do you want to keep the questions for later?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, it's a very good moment, but I'm just seeing if I can give Javier the mic. Let's see. Allowed to talk. Are you, I think you're permitted to talk now, Javier. Are you there?
Yes. It's
perfect.
Yeah, he was 3 people, so it's Javier's account. But yeah, the first question was actually my question. So it was towards Nathalie. And yeah, we're sitting here in Hamburg, but we're really interested in how your personal background and your experiences with caring in your life actually influenced your approach of using the interface of plants and technology. So like, how was the process? Like, so there was like a certain topic about caring, but like, what influences did you choose to actually work on this interface of plants and technology?
Thank you for your question. I would say it didn't begin with the idea of care. I think it came kind of in the process. I'm working in the field of digital media and mostly in the installation art. And I would say as a personal background, it was kind of important that I'm really often more against like having a low threshold for disposability and letting I have to find my words. I think it's very valuable to stick to something or someone and not like dispose it or them too fast. So this was kind of a notion that is also worked into it. I don't know if it's so understandable. And also what also played into it is that as working with electronics, I think it's always a little bit problematic if you see it from an ecological perspective, because the electronic parts don't come from out of nowhere. They always get extracted somewhere, and often it's also plants who are suffering from it, because in the practices of getting the parts, the minerals, and whatever, it's often not only plants, of course, humans and animals suffering from the practice of getting these things. And so this was all kind of what I wanted to work with this plant machine in a framework where it was thematically about cybernetics, but I kind of drifted away a little bit from it, and with all the influence from this eco research, it kind of evolved into this. It's not as I hope I kind of could answer your question, and otherwise you can ask me again.
No, thanks. That was actually pretty helpful to get this view on it and to understand the relations, connections to it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Let's see. One of the other things, but it might drift a bit far from the work that Nathalie made, but Jeannette, one of the things you addressed in the essay as well is around care practices, is the practical professional education of nurses and other paramedics are really outside of the the academic research field. And the doctors obviously make reflections and clinical practices part of their universal studies. And yeah, you've been researching this for a longer period. Is that coming together a bit more in the recent years, sort of, or maybe even the recent situation, the COVID period, or?
No, so I've been studying care all my researching life, and that started with my master's studies. Yeah. So that's indeed a lifelong interest. I don't think I will get over it. But what was relatively new for the essay that I wrote for your book is this notion of the aesthetic value. So the idea was that there's a lot of aesthetic values in care and everyday life. You can think of mundane matters like a beautiful goal, or in care more for a beautifully healing wound, or a nice nurse, and all these qualifications are aesthetic qualifications. But there's no theorizing at all about what these aesthetics mean. So that was intriguing me. Like how is it possible that we have so many words to give aesthetic appreciations in care, and that we don't have an idea about how this works or where that comes from. And one of the reasons for that is that in the history of ideas, aesthetics have become delegated to art, to autonomous art, so the ground artist work. And it has disappeared from everyday life because in the 18th century, you could say that's where the demise of the aesthetic values of daily life started. There was a growing concern about people's morality, that it will not help society to develop, because at that time there were many civil wars, and the thinkers of the day related that to the passions of yeah, whoever was empowered, which was mainly the nobility. There was a transition to a modern society where also more middle class people would be empowered, or that was at least what they were striving for. So they were worried about the passions and the aesthetic passions, and they tried to individualize them, so they became matters of taste. And this idea of art as taste, it's very detrimental for art because it's kind of, yeah, it's also our neoliberal government saying, okay, if people want to go to musea, let them pay for themselves, or if they want to see artworks, let them pay for themselves, and let the artists also be so good as to look after themselves and earn their own money. So it became completely individualized and marketed, you could say. And hence we lost the sight on what it actually could mean for us, these aesthetic values in daily life. And I argue in my work that we should look at aesthetic values as social things. So they don't come from the sky. They're not individual authentic things, but they come up in relations, and they're part of cultures, if you want, and larger relational networks. And they also create these networks. And this is relating to the COVID, because we conducted a study where we looked at people in vulnerable groups. That could be older people, or people with intellectual disabilities, psychiatric patients, homeless people. And one of the things that we saw was that because we're all locked up at home and on our own, we are lacking these social experiences. And this is also what art can provide. So that we go together to a concert because we all like the same music, or we go to this exhibition because we are curious about how care can be imagined through art. And this is a very powerful, I think, very powerful working of art, that it can bring people together, and it can, give people shared experiences that are so important. And you notice how important it is when you start missing it, because we're all at home and we're not being able to gather or go to. So that's, in a nutshell, an answer to a large question.
So that, I see that Ana Maria Gomez Lopez also has a question, and I'm very happy that she's able to join another artist of this exhibition. And I will, I think you're able to answer it now, Ana Maria. Oh, sorry, now. I think you're allowed to talk.
For me now, the written question has disappeared. Oh no, it's here. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much for a great talk, Nathalie, Jeannette, and Florian. This is really, really a great start to this remote experience of the exhibition. And thank you very much for all your sharing and generosity of both the way that the work functions and it was planned, Nathalie, and also Jeannette, for your very perceptive and very astute commentary. I couldn't help coming to one point that connects both of your work practices, or that is something that I find intriguing for me also with my own work in the exhibition, which is the idea of a tubular network, and especially given Jeannette's comments just now with regard to networking and the idea of creating an extracorporeal network, be it in the context of care practices, Jeannette, for example, with your research into feeding tubes and sort of these kind of technological infrastructure to sort of improve perhaps the quality of life, or in at least its intention. But Nathalie, also in your own work, creating the tubular as a form of kind of appropriating the irrigation, or kind of, I say, really rethinking it from an angle that is not the same as, for example, in a greenhouse or in other contexts of agricultural infrastructures, but really kind of, I think, replacing it in a very interesting way. And I just wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts on this reflection, because for me, it definitely speaks about novel configurations of bodily and ecological functions. Thank you again.
Do you want to start, Nathalie?
Yeah, maybe I can say a few things. Thank you, Anna Maria. Yeah, I think like in the beginning, what I did with the tubes, it kind of worked like a, I would say almost like a electrical lane, because it's basically, instead of using the signal transmission via electricity, I used it with water. But yeah, I think it kind of evolved more from it. I didn't really think too much about the tubes so much in this way, but it's a very interesting question, because there are definitely very interesting differences also when just putting a cable and a tube next to each other. So yeah, maybe Jeannette.
Yeah, I hadn't made the connection either. So Anna Maria, that's very interesting that you make it. I'm thinking, if I look at the study of the feeding tube that we did with ALS patients, so that people who have, at a certain point, they cannot swallow very well anymore, and it takes hours for them to get food into their bodies. So this tube, it's stuck in their belly wall, so it's really an invasive thing. It goes through your stomach wall, and you can add fluid foods to people. But the interesting thing is that the tube is not a tube, you could say. It has very different meanings in different phases of the disease of patients, and also depending on whether they have informal carers that can help them with the feeding tube. But maybe as an example, for the doctors, it was really baffling that many patients in their situation didn't want to think about feeding tubes. They didn't want to have one. They didn't want a hole in their belly wall. They didn't want a plastic tube stuck into it. And the doctors were really surprised. They said, this is going to save your life. Why are you refusing it? Why are you postponing it? And all the patients did that. But what these doctors did not see is that the body is not only a functional thing that you have to feed and put food in it and then it excretes food and then that's done. It's also a sensuous thing. It's for hugging your children. It's for taking care of your partner, being with your partner, to be out on the beach and being seen by people. So it's very much, yes, there it is again, an aesthetic thing as well. And for people, the body as a sensuous aesthetic thing was much more important than the solving of problems, of mechanical problems, up to a certain point. Because when people had the disease for long enough, they would reconsider that, because they saw themselves taking hours to eat, really choking when they couldn't cough because they didn't have much muscle. And then it really changed. Then they could see that there might be some benefits from the tube. So the tube became a different thing. Really. It became a solver of problems at that point. So what they wouldn't have considered before was now suddenly an option. But then again, if you look at after the placement of the tube, again, it could be different effects. For some, it really worked. And for others, it didn't, because, for instance, they had to be fed by nurses and they were sitting there waiting for the nurse to come and feed them almost all day. So that was also, it could also lead to deterioration of life quality. So the short of my answer would be that yes, tubular technologies are very interesting, but there are different things in different moments in life, and that it's very interesting to study what they do and how they do it and whether they are beneficial to people.
Yeah, I think one big thing that is, now you say it, like the invasiveness of it, that is not really there in my artwork. It's very separated, so that's really a clear difference in the feeding tube. And
Yeah,
but interesting thought.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other additional questions from anyone in the audience? Just either type it in the chat, or oh, we've got an open question. Oh no, it was, I think, only the answer of Anna Maria.
Yeah, I would be curious to hear what Anna Maria's work is, where the interest comes from. Can you tell that, Anna Maria?
Yeah, sure. My work in the exhibition and in the context of my practice is around self-experimentation. And I am very interested in sort of technologies of medical and scientific infrastructure that create an extracorporeal body, but not with a, if you will, a kind of post-human or sort of even futuristic imprint, but really to focus, to have us see our internal physical processes as something that interacts with our immediate and ecological surroundings. So the work that I showed in the exhibition has to do with creating an extracorporeal circulatory system to have really, tools that have been used for common medical practices in venipuncture, such as hypodermic needles or extension tubes, among other things, and valves that serve different purposes, cannular or arterial cannulation, or create also connections with devices or equipment that can interact, say, with, in some cases, feeding tubes, but with other elements, and see it as an expansive whole, to not have that kind of segregation that you were describing, perhaps that some patients feel, but really see them as very intimate ways of being even more acutely aware of how we are connected to our immediate ecological surroundings.
It's interesting maybe to add that you have this whole quantified self movement where people measure all kinds of things about their bodies, and that they also have this idea that it makes them puts them in relationship to their environment, and that they can learn from that and learn about their bodies also. So that might also be maybe a nice angle for you to look into.
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of people with the self-quantification movement actually as kind of a way into self-experimentation. But I'm very interested in the tinkering part, perhaps, as you and Nathalie actually also share that as well, I feel, and the kind of bricolage of creating these things with devices that are, relatively of small kind of intensity, or that are invasive, but we're still perhaps common to people who, in my case, use hypodermic needles all the time, be it for medical reasons or for others. But yeah, no, thank you very much both for your answer. Very, very exciting conversation.
Thank you for your intervention.
Javier added another question. Maybe you want to ask it?
Hi. Thank you. It's pronounced Javier, but like Javier was the funniest one that I got until now. So thank you for that one. Yeah, we're from here, from Lung, from Hamburg. We also had an event with you, super nice. I'm also really hooked. Me as a spatial designer, I was really I was hooked by the name of the event, like the aesthetics of care. So I was thinking the last 2 days a lot about like how does care look like, and I just wanted to ask this more like a philosophical open question to the round. So like what could be like for you like corner pieces or maybe details, or like what would you say is the thing that makes like care manifest itself in space?
I mean, spontaneously, I would say it's not only like the visual, but the action part, I guess, what you do with it. Because I was thinking that just like to see context maybe in a economical context, that things that might look like they are for care are actually not there just for selling stuff, maybe, as to say it very simple. And so I think the care is more like the movement behind it, or the action behind what is happening. But of course, I think that there are certain associations you have with care, usually, I guess, in the medical field. Yeah, that's what's coming to my mind.
Yeah, there was also this one thing that you answered on the other question, that but in the process of looking up or like researching for your project, there was this point where like through care you needed to do decisions. And I think this is one thing that I wanted to get through. Like there are just some things that when they come to space, they cannot be like care. Like when you start to, I don't know, like as you said, like work with a lot of minerals that are hard to get, then at one point, like if you overuse it or make it like just as the corner piece of it, then maybe you cannot talk about care anymore, because then you forgot that these things are like the opposite of care.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I understand it correctly, like what the opposite of care is. I would only say that maybe yeah, there are things that are damaging, and I think that to speak about it is already kind of caring. I mean, it's not, maybe sometimes not enough to just speak about it, but I think an awareness about care and damage is already a good way to approach this.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think there's a lot of work also done in the care and space. It's spaces which we're particularly interested in. So how architecture, for instance, can be dementia friendly. So people with dementia can wander in space without getting lost. Or I've been doing field work in a nursing home where actually the idea was that people should get lost, because some people with dementia, they just want to move all the time. But they built the kind of circuit corridors that jump, lose their orientation as far as they still had it. And they could keep on wandering forever without noticing that they've been past this corridor already a couple of times. And one of the things that the architect also did that struck me was to hide the entrance. So the architecture was like that you could, if you would walk past it, you wouldn't notice the entrance. When I came there as a field worker, I missed the entrance, but the people with dementia who were living there for longer, they didn't. So they found out where it was, and they were sitting waiting until they could get out. So again, this is an interaction between the patient in this case, but also of course the caregivers and the buildings and the spaces. And you can have very inviting spaces and care settings, but also very restrictive ones. So it differs a lot. And again, there's a lot of different kind of aesthetics that can be thought about in relation to spaces as well as to care in general, you could say. So what is beautiful care for one caregiver isn't necessarily beautiful care for the other one. As an example, I remember that it is for some caregivers very important, nurses mainly, important that people get washed and dressed well. And they find it really disturbing if they cannot do this. But sometimes when, for instance, people are dying, it disturbs them to be washed. So they would have to not clean them. And this they found really, really very hard. So the aesthetics of their job of cleaning up a person, making them feel good, can be really very strong.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Thank you, Javier. Let's see. No, No further questions. I made a lot of notes, so I have a lot of additions to this conversation. I'm really curious how the conversation with Anna Maria will go. She will be in the spotlight on Friday. I think, yeah, if there are no further questions from the audience or from Jeannette and Nathalie, I think it's a good moment to wrap up, I'd say. But I won't do that before mentioning that we have, of course, 3 other conversations coming up with Dries en Verstappen, Anna Maria Gomez-Lopez, and We Make Carpets as artists. You can find the information on our website. And I want to thank Richard and Wilco for setting up this broadcasting system that looks very fancy. I had to get to know get acquaintance with it. So I'm still looking at pop-ups coming up, but I hope that wasn't too distracting. So the publication, The Two Mind is to Care, is still available. Also available free as EPUB on our website. And I want to thank all of you for joining.